Okay, so welcome to our third reading. This one is called Marius and Sulla. So, like I told you guys in the at the beginning of class yesterday, we're going to start transitioning into the more historical information. I know that there are going to be some huge gaps in our historical knowledge, so I'm going to try to fill them in, or at the very least, give you guys the Reader's Digest version so that we can understand what's going on. We don't have, unfortunately, the luxury of being able to review 750 years of Roman history. So we got to summarize at some points. So coming into, just the general plot, kind of jumping in the middle here. Rome, of course, was a monarchy at first. You had Romulus and the seven kings of Rome. Rome transitions to a republic, okay, which is thought to be a nobler form of government, right? The people have representation, the people have rule, but there's always, always, always this string going through Roman history of the haves and the have-nots, okay? You always have the upper class, you have the lower class. And for a long time in the early stages of the Republic, the lower class had no power in government whatsoever. They had no representation, they had no say in government. And at one point, they all just up and left. They actually seceded from Rome. And so an agreement was reached that they would have some representation in the government. And that position was called the tribune. So the tribune would have the power to veto the consuls, the elected leaders of Rome. So you had some structure where you would have the leaders who were elected, who were typically your upper class, your big name people, but there would always be someone in the government who could look out for the little guy. And eventually you get to a situation where that starts to fall apart. And even though these titles and these positions exist, there's really just a clash between the upper class and the lower class. And so those groups are referred to as the optimates, literally the best people, that would be your upper class, and the populares, the people's people, right? The sort of regular folk. The 1% and the 99% is the greatest, summary of that as I can do. Enter in these two very, very important figures in Roman history, Marius and Sulla. Marius is a little bit older. He's been around a little bit longer, and he is the sort of leader of the populares. He's the leader of the sort of everyman faction. And he's at one point allied with this guy named Sulla. Sulla is also a general. Sulla didn't come from that big of a family, but Sulla is the man of the optimates. He's sort of the leader of that faction. And so eventually Marius and Sulla are going to have a falling out, and the two of them are going to go to war. So this is really the first time that Rome is dealing with a civil war, right? Where you have two Roman leaders who are going to march on each other, essentially, and one of them is going to take the city of Rome, the other is going to retake it, and you're really entering into this very, very turbulent time in Roman history where, unfortunately, the Republic is falling apart. Okay, it's already kind of falling apart at this point. This is really starting to put the nail in the coffin. With that out of the way, okay, let's start learning a little bit about Marius and Sulla. I hope you guys watched that 10-minute video. I know it's a lot of information coming at you. Really, I just want you guys to get the sense of what life was like at this time, which is incredibly turbulent, incredibly rocky. People were being murdered left and right. If you found yourself on the wrong side of the political party, you might be put on what's called a proscription list. Basically, if your name was proscribed, it meant that anybody could legally kill you and take your property. So that's the level of chaos that we're dealing with. So this is a very, very rocky time for Rome. So let's get started. First word in the story is anno. Anno in the ablative case, okay, because the word anno, a year, is typically going to be in the ablative, either ablative or accusative. Orbis is in the genitive, and so is the participle conditae. And this phrase, anno orbis conditae, AUC, it's a stock phrase, and it literally means from the founding, in the year from the founding of Rome. So this would be one way that they would tell you, particularly later on in Latin, they would tell you what year it is. So specifically, it is sexcentesimo, which is another ablative, sexagesimo, another ablative, secundo. So this string here, sexcentesimo, sex being 6, cent being 100. So this is the 662nd year. So in the, I think we would say, in the 662nd year, AUC, from the founding of Rome. Literally, in the 662nd year of the founded city is really what it says. But we always translate this as from the founding of Rome. So when you see that phrase, AUC, sometimes it's anno orbis conditae, sometimes it's ab orbe condita, depends on the situation. If they tell you the specific year, typically it's going to be anno. So in the 662nd year from the founding of Rome, now remember Rome is founded 753 BC. So 753, 662, we're talking about the early 90s BC when all of this is going, 80s, 90s BC. So to put that into, frame of reference, Julius Caesar at this point is about 10? In the mid-80s, he's about 15, 16. So he's just coming into adulthood. So this is the generation before Julius Caesar. Okay, just to give you some historical context. Too savage, that's right. So in the 662nd year from the founding of Rome, so that's all we got in the first slide here. Primum, which could be accusative or nominative, Romae, come back to that word, bellum civile commodum est. So my verb is commodum est. So that tells me something. It tells me that my subject is it, pretty much, a neuter something. It is third person singular. Commotus means to stir up. So something has been stirred up. Something was put in motion, commotum. And that something that was put in motion is the primum bellum civile, the first war, civile, of the citizens. We would refer to it as a civil war. Romae, that's that special form, that locative form, so in Rome. Bellum civile, and then commotum est, that's third singular, perfect passive. So in that 662nd year from the founding of the city, the first civil war was stirred up in Rome. And now we're going to get an abbreviated kind of situation. So eodem anno, both in the ablative, eodem from idem, the same. So eodem anno, in the same year, etiam, also, Mithridaticum. So that is in the nominative case as well, because what's really been left out here is another commotum est, right? So in Latin, you're going to have situations like this where they're going to leave out the verb if you're going to use it twice. So the first civil war was stirred up in Rome, and also etiam eodem anno, in the same year, the first Mithridatic War was stirred up. And I would probably say in the same year, the first Mithridatic War was stirred up, maybe like as well. That kind of sounds pretty good. And make this translation a little bit bigger for you guys to see. There we go. So going back to the previous line to connect them. In the 662nd year from the founding of Rome, the first civil war was stirred up in Rome, and in the same year, the first Mithridatic War was stirred up as well. And the Mithridatic War refers to a war against a king named Mithridates. Mithridates was a king over in the east. This is talking about like the, Asia Minor kind of area. And essentially, as Rome is expanding its territory, because even before the empire starts, Rome is an empire. They just don't call it an empire. Rome has expanded. Rome has colonies all around. And so in this 1 year, you're going to have a war against Mithridates, this foreign king, but you're also going to have a war at home. So there's just trouble everywhere. Next line starts with kausam. That is clearly an accusative, right? So there's my direct object. Bello kiwili could be ablative, could be dative. But the fact that I have dedit here makes my brain start thinking about datives. Because dedit means give, right? And dative is when you give something to something. Gaius Marius, so the praenomen Gaius, that was his name, Gaius Marius, would be abbreviated, weirdly enough, with the letter C. So Gaius Marius, sexianes, trianes, this is your 6 times. So these ianes words are essentially, I think they're called like multiplicatives. Basically it means times. So sexianes would be your adverb here, consul, and then my verb here is dated, right? So what happened? Gaius Marius, consul 6 times, dated causam, gave a reason to the civil war. Now that's the literal translation, but what does that actually mean? If he gave reason to civil war, he what? He gave reason to it. He gave reason for civil war, which basically means he caused a civil war. So Eutropius, the author, is making a very bold statement here, right? He's choosing a side. He's saying that it was Marius that caused it, right? Marius is the one who gave a reason for civil war, which not every author is going to write it that way. So the author is telling you that, according to him, Marius is responsible, which is a way of saying the people, the populares, are the ones responsible. So these little authorial choices, they tell you a lot about the person who's writing it, right? If you think about how history is written, right? The optimates ended up eventually being the winners, right? You had a Roman Empire at this point. So later authors didn't seem to look very kindly upon Marius. Nam, I love this little word, nam. It means because, and then cum, remember, can be with, if it's with an ablative, or it can be when, or since, or because. And that's the kind of cum that we have here. So putting a nam and a cum is a little bit redundant. So we're probably just going to translate it once. Or maybe not, depending on where we go. Sulla here is nominative, consul. So we have the 2 consuls, Marius and Sulla. Contra is a preposition. It takes the accusative case, which is so convenient to have Mithridatem. Gesturum, think about what we're learning about this week, participles. So this is a future active participle. It is in the nominative case. Gesturum from gero. Gero means to carry, to bring, to bear, unless it's with the word war, and then it means wage, because that's the only thing we do with wage. So with war rather, we carry out war. So nam is telling me to connect to my previous sentence. So the previous sentence was that Marius caused the civil war. Why did he cause the civil war? Because cum, when Sulla, the consul, gesturus, so we have a participle, we're going to translate it as a relative clause here. Sulla, who was gesturus bellum, who was about to wage war against Mithridates. And we're going to talk more about this in class today, or tomorrow rather. You have to be creative when it comes to participles, right? There's no one perfect translation. You could say Sulla, who was about to wage war, Sulla, since he was about to wage war. You really can't decide on the best translation until you get to the end and you read the whole sentence. So you may want to come back and change what we have there. So I'm going to leave it as a relative clause, which is a pretty neutral kind of a translation. Why did he give reason to civil war? Because when Sulla, the consul, who was about to wage war against Mithridates, qui, so now we're getting into a relative clause, qui Asiam et Achaiam occupaverat, third singular pluperfect. Okay. So this relative clause here is actually giving me more information about Mithridates. So he was about to wage war, Sulla was about to wage war against Mithridates, who occupaverat had seized, had grabbed hold of Asia and Achaia. So when you are looking at these old terms, right, if you're not sure what they mean, you can just Google Achaia, and the spelling is going to change a little bit, but this is what happens when you Google Achaia. Like, I don't know what Achaia is. It tells you Achaia, sometimes transliteration from Greek as Achaia, is one of the regional units of Greece. So it is a region in Greece. Okay, it is a chunk of Greece, and it's part of the Peloponnese. So if you know anything about Greek geography, if you look here, you'll see that Greece has a big sort of top part, and then it's got this almost an island situation here, referred to as the Peloponnese. The Peloponnese almost looks like someone's hand, just kind of sticking out like this. It's got fingers. So Achaia is part of that. Now Asia, I don't recommend you just Google Asia, because of course modern day Asia is what we know of as Asia. But the Asia in the ancient world is Asia Minor. Okay, when you see Asia in Latin, they're typically referring to Asia Minor. So that is Turkey, that is what is called the Anatolian Peninsula. Okay, so don't be afraid to use Google. So Mithridates, who had seized Asia Minor and Achaia, a region of Greece, you can just call it Achaia. Now we have this miterator. So we got to go back a little bit. We have a passive verb. Mito means to send, so miterator was sent. We need a subject of that verb. And this is where you kind of get yourself into trouble when you're reading Latin, because the sentences go on for so long sometimes. Let's come back to this line. When Sulla, who was about to wage war against Mithridates, who had seized, we still don't have a verb yet for Sulla. He doesn't have a verb yet until you get to miterator. So when Sulla, who was about to wage war against this guy who had seized these lands, when Sulla was sent, so this verb, which is third singular imperfect passive, and you'll notice too it is subjunctive, and that's because of the cum, right? When, I'm just going to put that in parentheses so we remember, when Sulla was sent and isque, so we have a nominative there. The que just means and. Exercitum in campagna, ablative, place where. Paulisper is a little adverb, it just means for a little while. Teneret, right? Third singular, another imperfect subjunctive. Now, when you're reading long sentences like this and you're going to have multiple clauses and they're going to be connected, if those two verbs are the same tense, right, you've got a imperfect subjunctive in miterator, you've got an imperfect subjunctive in teneret, that usually means it's the same person. So when Sulla was sent, que and is, he, exercitum in campania Paulis per teneret. So we have our subject, then we got to pick up our verb, teneret. And he was keeping, holding his exercitum. He was keeping his army in campania. We'll talk about what campania is in just a second. Paulis per, when he was keeping them in campania for a short time. For a little while is what Paulis per means. Now, if you don't know what campania is, you go to the trusty Googles and you type in campania. And it tells you, of course, it has a modern Italian spelling, which is campania with a G-N. This is Campania. Oop. That's the little town of Campania. I want the region of Campania. Right? So this is Campania. So we will get into Roman geography and Italian geography because it is so important. But Rome is basically up here in the central. This is Lazio. This is the region that has Rome. So Campania is down to the south. Campania probably most famous for like Naples. Right? Boop, boop, boop. We're a prose class though. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds. So when Sulla, well, let's go back so we keep the thread of the whole. When Sulla, the consul, who was about to wage war against Mithridates, who had seized Asia Minor and Achaia, when Sulla was sent, and he was holding his army in Campania for a little while, when he was sent ut. So we have to think in our brains all those different uts that we learned last year. Typically when you have an ut, go with two and see what happens. So when Sulla was sent and was holding his army in Campania for a short time. But the key here is that when Sulla was sent to, right? So this would be a purpose clause. When he was sent to belli socialis in the genitive, de qual diximus, so we have a relative clause sort of smack dab in the middle, because why not? That's how Latin works. Okay, you don't just get one construction, you get a bunch of them. Then we get a quad, so we get another one, another relative clause, which intra Italiam, within Italy, gestum fuerat, had been waged. So this is an interesting tense because we don't normally see something like this. You don't normally see a fourth principal part with fuerat. You normally see a fourth principal part with a erat. But since we're already in the past tense, we got to use a pluperfect. So we're kind of using like a pluperfect, which is really hard to imagine. But it is third person singular. I mean, I'm going to call it super pluperfect because I can call it whatever I want. I don't know what it's actually called, but we're going to call it super pluperfect. Because it's pluperfect, gestum erat, plus fuerat is pluperfect, so it's super pluperfect. It's a technical term that I just invented. And then we have our nominative here, reliquae tolerentur. So this is a weird construction, and I know that you guys are watching this video going, how in the world, Bartoloma, are you expecting us to be able to do all of this? And that's why it's only October. I still need more time to get you guys into shape. But I just want you to see what's out there, okay? So when Sulla was sent to, and I'm just going to take out the holding his army part because that's just going to get in my way. When Sulla was sent to, first thing I get is a couple of genitives. Get out of my way. I don't need you. Then I get a relative clause about those genitives. Get out of my way. I don't need you. Then I have a relative clause about the relative clause about the genitives. Get out of my way. Get me a nominative. Get me a subject. And the subject here is reliquae. Reliquus means like the remaining, when it's plural like this, particularly feminine plural, it means the remains, the stuff that's left over, the remaining, I think it's reliquiae partes, right? The remaining parts, the remaining pieces. So Sulla was sent to, and since it's passive, he was sent to remove the remainder of the Civil War. So he was sent basically to get rid of the reliquiae, the remainders, the last bits, the last bits, why not? The last bits of Belli Socialis, of the social war. And I think we'll capitalize that because that's a formal name for a war. The social war, de quo diximus, about which diximus, I spoke, or I have spoken. And when an author tells you it's something that I have spoken about, what they mean is something that I have written about. I'm speaking to you through my words, okay? So when Sulla was sent to get rid of the last bits of the social war, which I have spoken about which I have spoken, which gestum fuerat which had been waged intra Italiam, within Italy. And it's a real big cliffhanger because we don't actually get what Marius does yet. So going back through that one more time, because it is a really complex sentence, and I don't want to scare you guys, but when you're reading real Latin, sometimes it gets a little wonky, okay? So going back to this line here. Gaius Marius, consul for 6 times, 6-time consul, gave reason to civil war. He gave a reason for civil war. He essentially caused the civil war. Nam, why did he do that? Why is he responsible? Because when the consul Sulla, who was finna wage war against Mithridates, who had seized Asia and Achaia, when Sulla was sent, and was holding his army in Campania for a little while, holding his army in Campania, so I'm actually going to change this, when he was holding his army in Campania, for what purpose? And I've been a little bit loose with my translation here. Really, he was holding his army so that the remainders of the civil war, of the social war, about which I've spoken, which had been waged within Italy, so that the remainders of that civil war, so that I keep calling it civil war, I shouldn't do that. The remaining bits of the social war would be toloed, would be lifted out of existence, right? Would be erased. So when Sulla was doing that, and then when we pick up part 2, we'll see what Marius did. So just one last thing before I sign off here. I translated this as if it were active. He was holding his army in Campania to get rid of the last bits. Really, if we were being very, very literal, he was holding his army so that the last bits of the social war would be destroyed. That is the closest translation to keep it exactly how it was. But in English, we would probably flip it around, and we wouldn't say he was holding his army so that the last of the Civil War would be erased. We would probably say he was holding his army to erase the last bits of the Civil War. That's why it's passive here. Okay, that was a lot. You guys are watching this video. You're probably thinking, oh my God, what in the world have I got myself into? That's okay. We'll talk about it in class. Okay? I'll see you guys then.